Alexandra Ward had spent 20 years living in the shadows, missions without names, victories without witnesses, and scars she never explained. Retirement from the Navy SEALs had been less of a decision and more of a slow, heavy exhale. She had done her part. That was what she told herself. But deep inside, she knew she didn't belong in quiet suburbs or peaceful mornings. A warrior without a battlefield is a ghost walking daylight. Which was why, on a cold Monday morning, she found herself at Northwood Military Base, pulling her duffel bag from the back of a nondescript government truck. The early sun struggled through the fog like it was trying to decide whether it even wanted to be here. She couldn't blame it. Northwood was the kind of place where discipline was preached but not always practiced, especially for the young recruits who believed muscles and attitude made them invincible. Alex adjusted her cap and took in the surroundings. The base was medium-sized, steel buildings lined in military gray, training fields stretching to the tree line, and the old brick headquarters tower standing like a relic from an era when respect meant something. The smell of metal, gasoline, and morning dew mixed into a scent she recognized, not comforting but familiar enough to feel like a return to gravity. She walked toward the admin office, her boots hitting the pavement in quiet, controlled steps. She always moved like a SEAL, even if no one here knew it. And they didn't. Her new role, security and discipline advisor, was deliberately vague. That was how the department liked it. They placed her where structure was fading, where arrogance grew like weeds. Northwood had been flagged for multiple internal reports, hazing, misconduct, unprofessional behavior. Someone needed to clean it up. Apparently, that someone was her. Inside the admin office, a young soldier with a regulation buzz cut looked up. The name tag read Cooper, but the attitude in his eyes spelled something closer to "I'm bored and unimpressed." "Ma'am, yeah," he said, glancing at the orders in her hand. "You're the new, advisor? Thought they'd send someone older." Alex raised an eyebrow. "I'm plenty old." Cooper flushed. "No, I mean like, rank old, command old. You know what? Never mind." He cleared his throat. "You'll be staying in Barracks C, co-ed wing." Of course it was. She took the key card and walked out before he embarrassed himself further. Behind her, Cooper whispered to another clerk, "Bet she won't last a week here." The other clerk laughed. Alex didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She'd heard variations of that line for 20 years. Every time, it ended the same way. Someone learning a lesson they'd never forget. The co-ed wing wasn't difficult to find. Loud voices echoed through the hallway long before she reached it. Soldiers shouting, joking, arguing, the kind of noise that belonged in a locker room, not military housing. She stepped inside, and the chatter dipped for a moment. Just a moment. A few young men glanced in her direction, sizing her up like newcomers were sport. The tallest one, broad shoulders, jaw clenched like he chewed intimidation for breakfast, nudged his friend. "That the new advisor? Looks soft. She ain't gonna do anything to us." Alex walked past them without acknowledging the comments. Not because she didn't hear. She heard everything. Their tone, their posture, even the way their eyes followed her movement told her what she needed to know. She was entering a base with an ego problem. And ego problems were her specialty. Her room was sparse. Single bed, metal locker, small desk, and a window facing the training yard. She placed her duffel on the bed, but didn't unpack. Not yet. Instead, she stood at the window, watching a group of soldiers doing morning drills. Sloppy form, sluggish energy, leaders not correcting them. Northwood wasn't broken, but it was cracking. Alex crossed her arms, letting her jaw tighten ever so slightly. She had come here to restore discipline, order, and a sense of respect. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that in less than 48 hours, the same soldiers who mocked her would corner her in the locker room, push her patience to its limit, and trigger the lethal instincts she'd buried. Northwood wasn't ready for her, but soon it would be.
Alex didn't bother unpacking. Not yet. Northwood Base felt like a place where your bag should stay ready, just in case you needed to leave, or fight. She tied her hair back, straightened her uniform, and stepped out of her room. If she was going to understand this place, she needed to see the soldiers up close. Not the sanitized reports, not the paperwork, the real picture. And at Northwood, the real picture was usually loud. The morning briefing field sat behind the barracks, where squads gathered before training. She headed there, following the trail of voices, bravado, swearing, laughter too forced to be natural. As she approached, a group broke off from the rest. 5 men, all around their mid-20s, each one carrying himself like the world owed him a salute. This had to be Alpha Squad. They walked like a pack, shoulder to shoulder, and everyone else subtly moved out of their way. That told Alex more than any report could. Bullies don't hide, they flaunt, as long as no one's ever put them back in place. The leader, unsurprisingly, was the tall guy she'd seen earlier in the hallway. His name patch read, Sergeant Mason Hale. Muscular, sharp jawline, eyes that scanned people not with curiosity, but calculation, looking for weakness. Next to him was Corporal Briggs, heavier build, the type who relied on size over skill. Behind them, Reed, Walters, and Kane, the echo chamber trio. They didn't lead, they followed, laughed, encouraged, and escalated. Alpha Squad. The problem of Northwood Base in one neat, badly disciplined package. As Alex passed by, Mason smirked. Hey, you're the advisor, right? The one we weren't expecting? Looks like it, Alex replied calmly. Briggs whistled. Thought they'd send some old dude, not... His eyes traced her up and down. This. Alex met his stare. Is there a problem with this? The group chuckled. Reed elbowed Briggs. Dude, she might write you up. Write me up? Briggs laughed loudly. Lady, we've had 6 advisors in the last year. They stay a week, then they leave crying or complaining. This place eats 'em. Alex gave a small nod. Good to know. Mason stepped forward, blocking her path. He didn't touch her, not yet. But the way he positioned himself was meant to intimidate. He was tall, yes, but she had seen taller men cry in interrogation rooms. She had thrown heavier men into walls. She had fought monsters that didn't wear uniforms. Look, Mason said, voice dropping, this isn't a base for consultants. We run things our way. If someone wants to stick around, they follow our rhythm. Alex blinked. Once. Slowly. Is that a threat, Sergeant? A friendly warning, Mason replied. Behind him, Walters whispered, She's gonna fold in 2 days. Kane snorted. 2? Bet she quits tonight. Alex's patience didn't waver, not even slightly. If you're done posturing, I'd like to observe morning drills. Mason shrugged, stepping aside with exaggerated politeness. Be our guest. But as she walked past them, she heard Briggs mutter, She'll learn her place. Alex didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew men like these, the ones who mistook physical strength for dominance, who mistook respect for weakness, men who had never faced someone trained to end a fight before it began. She stood near the training yard fence, arms folded, watching the squad as they joined the others. It took only 10 minutes of drills to confirm what she suspected. Alpha Squad didn't follow commands. They performed them lazily, mockingly. They shoved smaller recruits, laughed when someone stumbled, ignored their instructor completely. The instructor himself looked exhausted, almost resigned. No wonder discipline had collapsed. Northwood was an anthill, and Alpha Squad was the boot constantly kicking it. At one point, Mason locked eyes with her mid-exercise. He smirked again, flexing during push-ups like this was some sort of performance. The others snickered, enjoying their private joke. Alex remained expressionless. Let them have their moment. Let them build up their arrogance. Because arrogance always leads to one thing: a fall. And their fall was coming, sooner than any of them realized. By the end of the session, Alpha Squad walked off toward the locker room, their laughter echoing through the yard. A few recruits looked at Alex with quiet sympathy. Clearly they knew what the squad was capable of. Alex took a slow breath. Day 1, and she had already seen the rot. She didn't know it yet, but her next encounter with Alpha Squad wouldn't be in a crowded training field. It would be in the one place predators always choose: the locker room, where they thought no one could stop them, where they would make their biggest mistake.
The morning sun had risen fully now, burning off the fog that clung stubbornly to Northwood Base. But the clearer the sky became, the more Alex felt the tension thickening on the training field. It wasn't the usual pressure of soldiers pushing through drills. It was something else, an undercurrent of rivalry and resentment that ran silently beneath every command. She stepped onto the sideline, clipboard tucked under her arm, but not because she needed it. It was a prop, something that made her presence appear administrative rather than predatory. If Alpha Squad knew the truth of who she really was, the dynamic would change too soon. She needed to see them raw, unwarned, honest in their arrogance. Captain Rourke blew his whistle sharply and barked, "Hale, Briggs, your formation is crooked. Fix it before you embarrass the entire squad." Mason Hale didn't fix anything. Instead, he wiped sweat off his forehead and muttered to Briggs, loud enough for half the field to hear, "Old man's jealous he can't keep up." Several soldiers snickered. Captain Rourke pretended not to hear, but his jaw flexed. Alex took note. Lack of discipline wasn't the disease, it was the symptom. The real issue was fear. Not fear of Alpha Squad specifically, but fear of challenging the infection they represented. When leadership was afraid, rot spread fast. Rourke reset the drill. "Sprint line to line. Move." The squads broke into motion. Alex watched Alpha Squad closely. Their steps were powerful but sloppy, and their coordination was non-existent. Mason ran ahead deliberately, leaving his squad behind so he could show off his speed. Walters and Kane joked while sprinting, turning the drill into a competition of who could annoy the instructor more. Briggs shoved a smaller recruit aside during a turn, sending the kids stumbling into the dirt. No one corrected him. No one dared. Alex's eyes narrowed. During the push-up cycle, Mason made a show of grunting loudly, shouting, "Come on, boys, this is nothing." He wasn't motivating anyone. He was performing dominance, trying to see if she would flinch. She didn't. Her expression stayed calm, unreadable, the same look she used to wear when observing potential threats on foreign soil. It was the expression that always made enemy combatants sweat before she ever raised a hand. Mason didn't sweat. He smirked because he didn't know. Briggs shot her a glance mid-set, smirked, and mouthed, "Still watching?" before flexing his arms like he was posing for a fitness magazine. His friends laughed, a chorus of immaturity breaking the rhythm of the entire field. Another note Alex wrote, "Alpha Squad's confidence equals cocky, not earned, dangerous, but predictable." The wind picked up, blowing sand across the field. Rourke raised his whistle to signal the final phase of the morning session. Combat drills, paired sparring, controlled strikes, defensive maneuvers. This was where skill, or the lack of it, showed clearly. Alpha Squad stepped into the ring like they owned it. Mason glanced to Alex again, then paired with Briggs. "Watch this, sweetheart," Briggs muttered just loud enough. Alex didn't blink. Rourke blew the whistle. Briggs lunged first, reckless, full of brute strength but zero technique. Mason countered, but even his movements were sloppy, relying on weight instead of precision. Their sparring devolved quickly into a chest-thumping brawl rather than controlled combat. Other pairs paused to watch, knowing this would end badly. It almost did. Briggs threw a wild hook, missed, lost balance, and nearly collided with another squad. Rourke intervened with a furious shout, "Enough! Hale, Briggs, you want to fight? Do it in your own damn time. You're compromising the entire drill." Mason raised his hands innocently. "Just training, sir." I recognized the tone, sarcasm coated in obedience. It was the tone of a soldier who believed he was untouchable. She wrote her final note of the day. Alpha Squad doesn't need discipline, they need consequences. As the whistle blew to end the session, the soldiers dispersed. Some walked past her respectfully, others avoided eye contact, but Alpha Squad, of course, headed straight towards her. Mason wiped sweat from his neck. "Hope you enjoyed the show." "Informative," she replied. Kane snickered. "She's writing a novel about us." Briggs stepped closer, invading her space. Maybe she wants private lessons. Alex didn't step back. She didn't have to. She simply said, "If I ever need lessons on how not to fight, I'll let you know." Their smiles faltered. For the first time that morning, Alpha Squad wasn't sure if they should laugh or feel insulted. Alex gave a polite nod and left the field, leaving the tensions simmering behind her. She could feel their eyes on her back, uneasy, irritated, confused. Good. Confusion was the first crack in confidence. And cracks had a funny way of widening. She didn't know it yet, but before the day ended, the tension she felt on the training field would follow her into the barracks hallway and eventually into a place far more dangerous, the locker room, where boundaries blurred, where egos flared, where Alpha Squad would make the mistake that would change Northwood Base forever. The corridors of Northwood Base had particular kind of silence in the late morning, a hollow metallic quiet broken only by distant drills and the hum of ventilation. Alex walked steadily, the echoes of Alpha Squad's smirks still trailing behind her like a faint odor of gun oil and arrogance. She was almost at the stairwell when she heard a low voice call out, "Ma'am, hold up." The tone was firm, respectful, but heavy. Not the swagger of a young recruit. This voice carried years. Alex turned. A man in his mid-40s stepped out from a side office. His uniform was crisp, boots immaculate, posture tired but unbreakable. The name patch read, Staff Sergeant Derek Hale. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Hale. Mason Hale's father. Not the boy's arrogance, this man radiated something entirely different. His eyes were sharp, observant. The eyes of someone who had spent too long watching problems spread like wildfire through a base led by weak officers. "Staff Sergeant," Alex greeted calmly. "Something I can help you with?" He glanced down the corridor to ensure no one was listening, then approached. Not too close, just near enough that his voice could drop without being overheard. "I saw Alpha Squad circling you after training. I figured I should say something before things get stupid." Alex remained still. "I handled it." "I know you did. That is not why I'm here." He paused, searching her face, almost as if he was trying to read what she wasn't saying. Most people gave up after a second or two. Hale did not. "You carry yourself like someone who knows how to fight. Really fight. Not like my boy and his friends." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Your boy?" Hale exhaled sharply. "Unfortunately, yes. Mason Hale. Sergeant now, but he wears the rank like a costume." He shook his head. "He is capable, but cocky. Too many medals for too little war. Too many ears praising him for things he barely earned." Alex appreciated the honesty. It was rare in military politics. "And Alpha Squad?" she asked. Hale's jaw locked. "Their attitude is a problem. Has been for a while. But boys like them do not listen to men like me anymore." He topped his chevron.
Age makes you invisible to hotheads. Alex kept her expression neutral, but something inside her tightened. She understood the feeling, being underestimated because of what others chose to see. "What exactly are you warning me about?" she asked. Hale looked her in the eyes, and for a moment the hallway seemed to dim around them. "They do not like people who do not bow to them," he said. "Men like Mason poke until they get a reaction, and when they do not get one, they push harder." He hesitated. "I am not excusing him. I am ashamed, honestly. I raised him better." Alex studied him for a long, quiet moment. His discomfort wasn't performative. It was the discomfort of a father who knew his son was rotting from the inside but could not figure out how to pull him back. "Sergeant Hale, I appreciate the warning, but I can handle myself." "I do not doubt that," Hale said, and for the first time his gaze flickered, not with suspicion, but with a kind of recognition. "Still, there is a line on this base that Alpha Squad has been walking dangerously close to, and they are about to cross it." Alex felt the air shift. "Why tell me this?" she asked. Hale looked tired, deeply tired, but his voice remained steady. "Because I saw the way you watched them today. You caught details others ignore. And because men like Mason only learn when they hit something harder than their ego." He paused. "You look hard enough." Alex said nothing. Hale took a half step back, lowering his voice further. "I am not asking you to go easy on them. I am asking you to be ready. They are reckless in groups, especially when no officers are around. And the locker room wing? The cameras there are half dead. No one has fixed them for weeks." That was information, not a warning. Strategic information. Alex nodded slowly. "Understood." Hale swallowed, then added, "For what it's worth, ma'am, I hope whatever you are is exactly what this place needs." Before Alex could respond, he stepped away, boots clicking as he disappeared down the hallway. She stood still for a moment. The building hummed around her, but her mind replayed her words. They are about to cross a line. She had sensed it during training. Now she knew it was coming. And somewhere deeper in the base, Alpha Squad was already talking, already planning, already misreading her silence for weakness. The storm was nearing. Sooner than anyone expected. And when it came, the walls of Northwood Base would not forget it.
The mess hall at Northwood Base was always loud at midday. Trays clattering, boots stumping, conversations stacked on top of each other like overlapping radio channels. But as Alex stepped inside, the noise shifted. It did not disappear. It bent around her, thinning just enough for her to notice the glances, the whispers, the subtle ripple of curiosity that followed her since the morning drill. She picked up a tray and moved through the line, choosing simple rations: grilled chicken, rice, vegetables. Old habits, light food, clean fuel. She ate like someone who still had missions waiting, even though officially her days of deployment were over. She scanned the room with a calm, unobtrusive eye. Alpha Squad was there. All of them, clustered around a long table near the center, where the lighting was brightest and the visibility was highest. Mason Hale sat at the head, shoulders pushed back, grin wide as if he owned the entire hall. Walters and Kane flanked him, loud and animated. Briggs sat sideways on his bench, posture deliberately open, blocking part of the walkway with his leg. Territorial behavior disguised as laziness. They had seen her enter. They pretended not to stare. She pretended not to care.
Alex chose a small table near the wall, back to a corner where she could watch both the entrance and the main aisle. It was the kind of seat she had always taken, even when she was surrounded by comrades she trusted. Old instincts never died. They sharpened. She had barely taken her first bite before the tone at Alpha Squad's table shifted. The laughter changed pitch, sharper, meaner. Mason slapped his palm on the table. "I am telling you, she thinks she is better than us. Walks around like she owns the place." Walters snorted. "Long hair, small frame, attitude of a colonel. Wild." Walters leaned forward, hands clasped behind his head. "She is new. She should know her place." Briggs glanced over his shoulder at Alex, openly. "She is watching us again." Alex was not watching them, but she was listening, and they wanted her to. They wanted a reaction. She continued eating, unhurried. Staff Sergeant Derek Hale entered a moment later, carrying his own tray. He noticed her seat first, then his son's group. His face tightened, almost imperceptibly. Regret mixed with resignation. He approached Alex's table. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. Hale sat down, careful to give her space, careful not to make the interaction look too familiar. It was a courtesy, but also a recognition of the danger of drawing unnecessary attention. He kept his voice low. "They are stirring something." "I know," Alex replied. "They were talking even before I got here," Hale continued. "Locker room repairs, schedules, times when the hallways are empty. I do not like it." Alex's fork paused for a fraction of a second before she resumed eating. "And you think they will act soon?" "I think they are looking for an excuse to corner you. And excuses are easy to manufacture." Across the hall, Mason suddenly stood and raised his voice theatrically. "Hey, Briggs, you hear that? The newbie wants a private table because she's delicate." Snickers echoed. A few other soldiers watched uncomfortably, but said nothing. Mason leaned forward, staring directly at Alex. "Do you prefer silk curtains and candles too, ma'am?" Hale stiffened. "Ignore it. They want escalation." Alex finished her bite, wiped her mouth, and said, calmly, "Why say anything to a man who mistakes noise for strength?" Hale exhaled hard through his nose, half a suppressed laugh, half a warning. Briggs shot up from his seat. "What did she say?" Mason grabbed his arm, not to stop him for her sake. No, to stop him because Mason wanted the moment to happen on his terms, in his location where he felt completely in control. Their eyes locked across the hall. Mason's hungry, pride-heavy gaze, Alex's calm, measuring stare. It was not a confrontation yet. It was a countdown. Hale leaned forward slightly. "They will try something today. I can feel it." Alex placed her fork down, her voice steady as stone. "So can I." A tray clattered in the distance, someone dropping silverware. A gust of cold air swept in as the door opened. Shadows shifted. Something in the mess hall atmosphere cracked, thin, fragile, the first sign of a storm building pressure. Alpha Squad continued laughing, louder than before, louder than necessary, trying to bury their unease, trying to feed their courage, trying to forget the quiet woman in the corner who did not seem afraid of anything they did. By the time lunch ended, the decision had already been made in their minds. They were going to test her. And they were going to choose the place where they believed no one could stop them. The locker room. The place Staff Sergeant Hale had warned her about. The place where arrogance collided with reality. And the place where the truth would finally start to surface.
The tension from the mess hall didn't fade. It simply followed Lieutenant Commander Mara Briggs down the hallway like an unwelcomed shadow. The metallic scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint smell of oil from the armory vents. Northwood Base hummed with its usual regimented order, but today something felt off. Thurton C. Ailes' earlier warning replayed in her mind like a quiet alarm bell she refused to ignore. Mara was steps away from the operations wing when the red beacon above Corridor B12 flickered twice, an unmistakable signal. Security checkpoint activated. A sudden inspection, completely unscheduled. She stopped. That was unusual. Two military police officers approached from the far end of the corridor, boots studding in imperfect sync. One was young, stiff shoulders, clearly new. The other, Sergeant Vickers, wore the typical "I've seen too much" calmness in his eyes. Both carried tablets for identity verification. "Ma'am, sudden security inspection. Need your clearance card," Vickers said, already scanning the air around her like he expected trouble. Mara handed over her ID without hesitation. Her expression remained neutral, but internally her instincts sharpened. Surprise inspections usually had a reason. A breach? A threat? Or was this aimed at someone specific? Vickers ran her ID through the scanner. Nothing unusual. Until the reader froze. A tiny glitch, barely a second, but enough to catch Mara's attention. He frowned, tapped the tablet, then looked at her. "System slow today." "Or someone's pulling additional logs," Mara replied under her breath. Vickers paused, giving her a look that showed more than he was allowed to say aloud. The younger MP finished inspecting her equipment bag, opening each compartment with more force than necessary. When he reached the lower pocket, he glanced up at her as if expecting to find something incriminating. All he found was a neatly folded field map and a small notepad. He zipped it back, somewhat disappointed. "You're clear, ma'am," Vickers said, finally. "But if I may, there has been increased activity in the surveillance wing this morning. Might be related." Mara nodded. That confirmed her suspicions. Someone was stirring up something inside Northwood. She stepped past the MPs and resumed walking, but the inspection had slowed traffic behind her, enough for her to catch a glimpse of Alpha Squad turning the corner. Corporal Denton led the pack, swagger louder than his footsteps. His eyes locked onto hers instantly, narrowing just slightly. They'd been watching her all day, testing, provoking, waiting for a moment of weakness. Now they saw her coming out of a security stop, and they smirked. Denton whispered something to Reyes and Brooks. Whatever it was sent a cold ripple of amusement through their group. They gave Mara a look that wasn't just hostile, it was anticipatory. Like they knew something was coming. Like they were waiting for the perfect moment. Mara kept walking, posture steady, face unreadable. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Not yet. But internally her mind moved with the precision of the operator she had once been. If Northwood Base had shadows, she was certain Alpha Squad was learning how to hide inside them. And if today brought a random inspection, tomorrow might bring something far less polite.
Morning at Northwood Base usually carried a predictable rhythm. Boots hitting pavement, distant calls from the training fields, the hum of generators waking before the sun. But on this particular day, Mara Briggs sensed the shift before she even opened her eyes. It was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the waiting kind. She swung her legs out of bed with deliberate calm, every movement controlled. Last night's tension in the mess hall, the stares from Alpha Squad, and the random security inspection all clung to her thoughts like fog. She didn't believe in coincidences, not after 20 years in naval special warfare. The clock read 05:13. Early, even for her. Mara geared up faster than usual. No hesitation, no wasted motion. She tied her boots, tightened her uniform belt, and clipped her ID to her chest, all while her mind mapped the base's trouble points. If Alpha Squad, or someone backing them, was planning something, today would be the day they pushed. When she stepped outside, the crisp morning air hit her like a bracing shock. Fog rolled low across the ground, swirling around the floodlights that flickered against the dawn. A few soldiers jogged past, their silhouettes faint and hurried, whispering among themselves. No greetings, no nods. Everyone felt the tension. As Mara crossed the courtyard, she caught movement near the training cages. Denton, Reyes, Brooks, and two others she didn't recognize. They weren't scheduled for drills this early. Yet there they were, clustered together, speaking low, glancing her way as though checking to see if she'd noticed. She didn't break stride, but she noticed, and they knew she did. A horn blared suddenly from the direction of the main control tower.
Short, sharp, urgent. The sound jolted several soldiers around her. Mara instinctively checked her surroundings. No one looked confused by the alarm, but they looked nervous. A maintenance officer hurried past, nearly bumping her shoulder. "Command ordered everyone to report for readiness checks. Something's not right, ma'am." Mara didn't respond. She simply followed the stream of personnel toward the central plaza, where an announcement tower crackled to life. "Attention all units, effective immediately. All barracks will undergo full tactical inspection. All squads report to your designated briefing stations." A full inspection? 2 days in a row? Absolutely abnormal. Someone was tightening a net around the base. The only question was, around whom? As she approached the briefing hall, Thungsi Hale emerged from a side corridor. His eyes found hers instantly. Concern was written in the long crease across his forehead. "Briggs," he muttered, stepping beside her. "You feel it too?" "Hard not to," she replied. "Be smart today," Hale said quietly. "Alpha Squad's been moving like they've got clearance they shouldn't have, and someone upstairs is covering tracks." Mara slowed her pace, meeting his eyes with steady resolve. "I've been smart for a long time, Hale, but today, I'll be ready." He nodded once, satisfied, but not reassured. They entered the hall just as the doors sealed behind them with a heavy metallic thud, louder than usual, almost theatrical. The day had officially begun, and Mara Briggs knew with absolute clarity, this was the day everything would break open. This was the day Alpha Squad would cross the line, and this was the day she would no longer stay in the shadows. Because if they wanted a reckoning, they were about to get one. The corridors leading to the locker room smelled of disinfectant and damp metal, a scent that always reminded Mara of the quiet tension that existed before chaos erupted. By the time she approached the entrance, the noise of the base felt distant, muted by the thick walls of the training wing. Inside, shadows pulled around the rows of lockers, long and dark under the flickering fluorescent lights. Alpha Squad was already there. Mason Hale leaned casually against a locker, arms crossed, watching the hallway as if daring anyone to challenge him. Briggs and the others whispered, their heads close together, smirking in a way that made Mara's instincts tighten. Every step she took echoed slightly, announcing her presence, yet the squad remained frozen in that predatory pause that always precedes action. She didn't hurry. She didn't glance away. 20 years of being underestimated had trained her to move in these spaces with quiet authority. Every muscle, every instinct knew how to read subtle shifts, weight distribution, unspoken alliances, the slight twitch of a jaw indicating impatience or anger. Alpha Squad's arrogance had a rhythm. Today that rhythm was off, nervous. Mason spoke first, voice low but deliberate, just loud enough for the others to hear. "Looks like the newbie actually made it this far. Impressive." He smirked, eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Careful, we wouldn't want you to get lost in the lockers." Briggs nudged Mason. "Let's see if she's really as quiet as they say." The rest of the squad chuckled, taking small steps closer, forming a semicircle that on the surface seemed casual, but in reality was carefully orchestrated intimidation. They thought the locker room gave them control, an enclosed space where no one would intervene, no cameras to record their actions. Mara's hands stayed at her sides, unclenched, her posture relaxed but deliberate. She could feel the tension radiating from the group, the silent challenge in their movements. It was a dangerous mix of impatience and ignorance, the kind of combination that always preceded mistakes. She inhaled slowly, the scent of sweat, metal, and cleaning chemicals mixing in the air. Her gaze flicked to the nearest exit, noting the positions of the doors, the distance to the benches, the spacing of lockers. A quick mental map. In her mind, every object, every shadow, every potential blind spot became a variable in a calculation she had been performing unconsciously since arriving at Northwood. Mason stepped forward slightly, smirk widening. "So, you're really not intimidated, huh?"
Mara tilted her head, calm, measured. Intimidation isn't necessary when mistakes are predictable. A slight shift passed through the squad, a flicker of unease. They didn't know her. They had never faced someone trained to anticipate not just the action, but the intention behind it. That gap, overconfidence versus unseen skill, was already beginning to widen. Briggs snorted, trying to cover the momentary hesitation. "We'll see about that," he muttered. Mara allowed a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if acknowledging the challenge. But inside, her mind was already 2 steps ahead, calculating outcomes, preparing responses that would end the confrontation before it even fully began. For a few suspended moments, the locker room felt frozen. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken threats and bristling anticipation. Every soldier in that semicircle held their breath, waiting for a reaction that never came. The storm was coming. Mara could feel it in every shift of weight, every twitch of muscle, every misjudged glance. And when it hit, the consequences would be undeniable. Alpha Squad didn't know it yet, but they had walked straight into a calculated silence, a calm before the inevitable reckoning. The locker room was theirs in space, but not in control. And Mara Briggs, the quiet observer to all their arrogance, was already ready.
The locker room, already thick with tension, seemed to shrink around the group. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows across the lockers and concrete floor. Mara Briggs remained calm, her posture relaxed, but her eyes scanned every subtle movement. She could feel Alpha Squad's patience fraying, their arrogance curdling into something more dangerous. Mason Hale's smirk faltered for the first time as he stepped closer. "Seriously? You think silence is enough?" His voice was low but sharp, cutting through the ambient hum of the ventilation system. Briggs edged forward, testing boundaries without overcommitting, watching Mara's reaction. "Don't worry," Mara said evenly. "I won't move unless necessary." That simple declaration seemed to ignite something within the group. Walters lunged suddenly, grabbing her arm, a rough, possessive gesture meant to intimidate. Kane joined in, shoving her lightly against a locker, expecting to see hesitation, expecting fear. Mara didn't flinch. She didn't flinch because she had spent decades facing situations far deadlier than a cornered locker room. Her hands stayed loose, ready. Her stance, subtly shifted, was prepared to counter any movement instantly. Briggs laughed, cruel and loud. "Look at her. She isn't even scared. Come on, boys, teach her a lesson." Reyes stepped forward aggressively, trying to grab her shoulder. Mason reached for her neck, jokingly, or at least pretending it was a joke, squeezing just enough to elicit a reaction. "Fuck off, newbie," he sneered. The moment slowed. Inside Mara's mind, 100 calculations ran in milliseconds. Each angle, each momentum, each potential consequence of every strike or grab mapped out. She could end this now, decisively, without leaving permanent damage. But she wouldn't. Not yet. Not until she had asserted the lesson that needed teaching. Her reflexes moved faster than they could perceive. She pivoted just slightly, using her momentum to unbalance Mason, her forearm brushing against his chest to redirect his lunge. Walters and Kane, expecting her to stumble, ended up off balance themselves. In a few fluid motions, precise, controlled, nearly invisible, she neutralized each of them, pressing them to the lockers or sliding them to the floor, without breaking bones. The room fell silent. Every eye was on her now. Mara's breathing was steady, calm, measured. She finally spoke, voice quiet but carrying the weight of authority and experience. "You tested boundaries, you found them, and you almost crossed a line that can't be ignored. I suggest you remember who stands before you and what control really means." The shock on their faces was immediate. Confusion, humiliation, and fear flickered in succession. Mason's jaw tightened. He had underestimated her. They all had. At the far end of the room, the metallic clang of the locker doors echoed like a drumbeat of their realization that this wasn't play. This wasn't an argument of ego. This was controlled, deliberate skill, and it belonged to someone who had survived far worse than any prank or hazing ritual in Northwood Base.
A faint whistle sounded outside the locker room, the signal of the nearby officer's approach. The squad froze, their confidence broken, faces flushed with a mixture of shame and unease. Mara straightened, her eyes sweeping over the group, and added, "Respect is not optional. It is earned, and when it is ignored, consequences follow." The group remained on the floor and against the lockers, hesitant, uncertain. The lesson was delivered silently, yet unequivocally. They had tested her. They had been wrong. Outside, footsteps approached faster. The sound of command boots echoed through the corridor. The storm that had been building since the morning drills had finally broken. And Alpha Squad had just learned that arrogance and violence were never enough against someone trained to survive and to control chaos with 20 years of precision. The locker room, moments ago a battlefield of anticipation, now became a stage for a lesson that would echo through Northwood Base far longer than anyone could have expected. Mara Briggs allowed a single controlled exhale. The first wave was over, but the day was far from finished. The reckoning had begun.
The locker room still buzzed with residual tension, the air thick with the scent of sweat, fear, and disinfectant. Alpha Squad lay sprawled across the floor and against the lockers, each soldier painfully aware that they had miscalculated. Their arrogance had collided with decades of skill, and the collision had left them off balance, physically and mentally. Mara Briggs didn't rush forward. She didn't need to. Every movement she had made so far had been deliberate, precise, and entirely controlled. Her eyes scanned the room, calculating, assessing who posed a real threat and who merely followed the pack. She had neutralized the initial assault, but the moment demanded one final, decisive act to cement authority. Mason Hale, fumbling to regain composure, attempted to rise. His smirk had vanished, replaced by an edge of panic. Walters and Kane shifted slightly, still groaning from their previous imbalance. Mara's hands moved almost imperceptibly, but every gesture was loaded with decades of military training. In a fluid motion, no wasted energy, no dramatics, she pivoted, guiding Mason's momentum past his center of gravity, twisting his arm behind his back. He collapsed against the floor with a muted grunt, immobilized without harm. Simultaneously, she intercepted Walter's forward lunge with a subtle sweep of her leg, sending him to the floor before he could fully engage. Kane attempted to regain a striking stance, but Mara's elbow pressed against his chest, halting him instantly. Briggs, standing nearby, froze mid-step, realizing she had already assessed his intentions before he had fully committed. Every strike, block, and redirect happened in seconds, too fast for anyone untrained to follow. The chaos in Alpha Squad's eyes was evident. Confusion, panic, and humiliation mingled in a cocktail far stronger than any physical pain. Mara's calm, deliberate motions contrasted sharply with their frantic energy. "Enough," Mara said, her voice low, commanding yet composed. It carried the weight of experience and the certainty of consequences. "You tested the boundaries. You failed. Remember this." The squad was quiet, immobilized in body and spirit. Not one of them dared speak. Their previous bravado had evaporated entirely, replaced by the raw awareness of the gap between their inexperience and the reality of her skill. Mara straightened, her stance measured, her breathing even. She looked at each of them in turn, Mason, Walters, Kane, and the others, letting them absorb the lesson without uttering another word. A single metallic clink from a locker down the room punctuated the silence. Somewhere outside, footsteps approached, staff moving with suspicion, alerted by earlier columns or perhaps by the faint echoes of the struggle. Mara didn't flinch. She had maintained control throughout. Any reinforcements were irrelevant. Alpha Squad, sprawled across the floor, now understood fully. Underestimating her was a mistake they would not forget. 20 years of naval special warfare experience had neutralized their arrogance in moments, and every second of that demonstration etched the lesson into their consciousness. Mara allowed herself a small, measured exhale. The first phase of confrontation was complete. Authority had been established. Control had been restored. And yet, the day was far from over. Outside the locker room, voices grew louder. Officers arriving. Alpha Squad would face scrutiny beyond Mara's own lesson. But in this room, the truth had already been made clear. Arrogance and aggression could be dismantled in mere seconds when faced with precision, discipline, and experience. Mara Briggs took a single step back, eyes scanning the immobilized squad one last time. No one would forget this. Not today, not ever. The storm had struck, and its mark was indelible. The reckoning continued, and the base would never view arrogance or silence the same way again.
The muffled clang of boots on metal echoed down the corridor outside the locker room, signaling the approach of higher authority. Mara Briggs remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed, yet every muscle remained primed, like a coiled spring. Alpha Squad, still sprawled across the floor and against lockers, glanced nervously toward the door. Their previous bravado had been completely shattered. Now it teetered between fear and disbelief. The door swung open. Staff officers poured in, Colonel Matthews at the lead, followed by Lieutenant Commander Hayes and 2 other senior officers. Their faces registered immediate shock, not at Mara herself, but at the scene before them. The squad, immobilized, scattered across the floor, silently bearing the humiliation of their overreach. "Sergeant Hale, what happened here?" Colonel Matthews barked, scanning the room like a hawk. His voice carried authority, but even he paused at the sight of Mara, assessing, calculating. Hale stepped forward quickly. "Sir, ma'am, the squad attempted to provoke Miss Briggs. They crossed the line physically, and he hesitated, his voice heavy with respect, neutralized them swiftly, without causing injury." Mara didn't speak. She let Hale handle the initial briefing. Her silence carried weight. The officers' attention shifted as they processed the scene, the calm, precise control she had exercised over 5 fully grown, trained soldiers. Colonel Matthews' eyes narrowed. "You're Briggs?" he asked, incredulous. Mara nodded. "Yes, sir." A pause. Matthews' expression softened slightly, replaced by a mixture of awe and realization. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stepped closer, whispering under his breath, but loud enough for Hale and Mara to hear. 20 years in naval special warfare? Mara's mouth remained a straight line. 20 years. 2 decades of covert operations, deployments, missions most in the room could not even begin to imagine. She had kept her past under wraps intentionally, allowing only select individuals, like Hale, to know. Now the truth could no longer remain hidden. Mason Hale struggled to his knees, rubbing his arm, eyes wide, shame flooding his features. The rest of Alpha Squad avoided eye contact completely, some looking anywhere but at Mara, some staring at the floor, their pride obliterated. Colonel Matthews turned fully toward Mara, his voice steadier but still commanding. "I had no idea. Your background. 20 years as a Navy SEAL? That explains a great deal." "Yes, sir," Mara replied evenly. "I've maintained control of the situation. The squad's behavior needed correction before it escalated further." The officers nodded, but it was clear their admiration came laced with shock. They were witnessing the aftermath of something few could even comprehend, a storm of trained skill, precision, and experience condensed into a few moments, carried out by a single, composed operator. Hale stepped slightly to the side, observing Mara with pride and relief. His earlier warning had been validated and, more importantly, her actions had prevented what could have become a dangerous confrontation. Colonel Matthews glanced at the squad. "Alpha Squad, your actions today were unacceptable. You will report to immediate debrief and disciplinary review. I expect full cooperation." His gaze flicked briefly to Mara. "And thank you for maintaining control without escalating the situation further." Mara inclined her head slightly. "Understood, sir." The squad shuffled toward the door, their previous arrogance replaced by humility, embarrassment, and a hint of fear. Outside the locker room, the echoes of boots and conversations continued, but inside, one truth was indisputable. The power of skill, discipline, and quiet authority had asserted itself, leaving a lesson none present would forget. The day was far from over, but for now, Mara Briggs had made her mark. The storm had passed, and the calm after it carried the unmistakable imprint of respect and fear.
The locker room had emptied of Alpha Squad, but the atmosphere remained charged, heavy with tension and silent awe. Mara Briggs sat on the edge of a bench, her uniform pristine, her posture still composed. The subtle hum of the ventilation system mixed with the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe, creating a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the storm that had just passed. Staff Sergeant Hale stood nearby, arms folded, watching Mara with a mixture of respect and relief. "It's done," he said quietly, "at least for now." Mara nodded, but her mind was already running through the ramifications. 20 years in naval special warfare was a past she had kept secret for a reason. Northwood Base, Alpha Squad, and even some of the command staff had underestimated her. Now, that truth had been revealed, not through words, but through action. Colonel Matthews and Lieutenant Commander Hayes returned, accompanied by several other officers. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to unmistakable recognition as they observed Mara. The realization settled slowly across their faces. This quiet, controlled advisor was no ordinary officer. She had lived and operated in situations that demanded absolute precision, courage, and unflinching discipline. "Miss Briggs," Matthews said, voice steady but heavy with awe, "we were unaware of the full extent of your experience. 20 years as a Navy SEAL. That explains everything." Mara allowed a small nod. "I've operated in environments where underestimating an opponent can cost lives. I've trained others to do the same. I only intervene when necessary. Today was necessary." Lieutenant Commander Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Mara and Hale could hear. "It's rare to see that level of control, even among active SEALs. You made the difference between humiliation and disaster." The officers moved on to brief Hale, leaving Mara momentarily alone. Alpha Squad had been sent for debrief and disciplinary action, but their whispers and scouted stares from the hallways suggested the lesson had already been learned. Respect, or at least fear, had replaced arrogance. Staff Sergeant Hale approached Mara again, his voice subdued. "They'll never forget this day. Neither will the base." Mara's eyes swept the empty lockers, the shadows still lingering in the corners. "I don't need them to remember me," she said softly. "I need them to remember the principle. Respect is earned, not assumed, and recklessness has consequences." For a moment, silence fell. Even the flickering fluorescent lights seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the gravity of what had just occurred. 20 years of experience, decades of unseen heroism, and countless silent sacrifices had culminated in a moment that Northwood Base could not ignore. Outside the locker room, voices buzzed as officers discussed the incident. Rumors would spread, reputations would shift, and the culture within Alpha Squad would be forever altered. But inside, Mara Briggs remained composed, a quiet sentinel whose skill and discipline had spoken louder than any words ever could. Staff Sergeant Hale placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You've shown them who you really are," he said, voice low but firm. "And the truth is undeniable." Mara stood, adjusting her uniform. Truth always has a way of revealing itself. It just depends on who's paying attention. As she walked toward the exit, the base itself seemed subtly different. The lesson had been delivered, the arrogance quelled, and the respect, though grudging in some, had been earned. Mara Briggs's past was no longer a secret, and for the first time in decades, the weight of that history resonated openly, a quiet reminder of the power of experience, discipline, and unshakable authority. Today the truth had been revealed, and everyone at Northwood Base would carry the memory of it, whether they wanted to or not.
The echo of retreating boots faded, but the locker room remained saturated with tension. Mara Briggs adjusted the strap of her gear bag and let her eyes sweep over the scattered Alpha Squad. Their expressions had shifted from fear to disbelief as the full scope of her capability had been revealed. Yet there was more to the revelation than mere skill. It was the acknowledgement of her past, the weight of 20 years in the naval special warfare community. Colonel Matthews, his face stern but eyes sharp, stepped closer, clearing his throat. "Ms. Briggs, I believe there is more we need to know." Mara met his gaze evenly. "What you see is enough for operational purposes, sir." But the colonel pressed on, lowering his voice, just enough to carry authority while maintaining discretion. 20 years in the SEALs, numerous covert deployments, this isn't just operational experience. It's leadership, strategy, and combat proficiency at the highest level. The base should be aware of your background. A ripple ran through Alpha Squad. Mason Hale's jaw tightened, and Walters avoided eye contact entirely. They hadn't just witnessed skill. They had just seen history and prestige condensed into action. The woman they had mocked and tried to overpower had lived a life they couldn't begin to comprehend. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, standing beside Matthews, added quietly, "Your reputation precedes you, though it seems it has been kept deliberately under wraps. This changes how we approach training and how we manage interactions like today." Mara remained calm, serene even, letting the weight of her silence underscore the revelation. Every action she had taken spoke louder than any words about her past. For the squad, the officers, and the base, it was now undeniable. This was a veteran whose authority could not be questioned lightly. Hale, standing slightly to her side, muttered softly, "They'll respect it, or at least fear it. That's a start." The officers exchanged glances. For Matthews, Hayes, and even Hale, it was clear that Mara's past wasn't just a personal history, it was a living testament to discipline, resilience, and precision. Every operation, every SEAL training exercise, every covert mission, though hidden from the base's records, had culminated in this singular demonstration. Mara spoke finally, voice measured. "My past is not a tool for intimidation. It is context for action. Today, the lesson was about boundaries and respect, not titles or accolades." Mason Hale swallowed hard, struggling to reconcile his earlier bravado with the weight of the truth. Walters and Kane exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier arrogance extinguished. The squad had learned in moments what 20 years of experience could teach in decades. Colonel Matthews nodded, conceding authority silently. He said, "Very well. Let the base understand this discreetly, but let it also be known that Ms. Briggs's expertise is not to be questioned. Not now, not ever." Mara inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the command without fanfare. Her reputation, once a silent force, was now known. Her SEAL past was no longer hidden. The impact would ripple through Northwood Base, influencing behavior, respect, and the understanding of what it truly meant to face someone trained in the art of survival, discipline, and precise action. Outside the locker room, whispers began to circulate, hushed but rapidly spreading. The narrative of the quiet advisor had been rewritten. The legend of Mara Briggs, 20-year SEAL veteran, was now cemented, not through rumor, but through undeniable, lived demonstration. And Alpha Squad, along with the entire base, would never forget the day the past revealed itself, and the true measure of skill, authority, and respect was made manifest.
The aftermath of the locker room incident rippled through Northwood Base like an unseen shockwave. Mara Briggs had returned to her quarters, methodical and composed, but Alpha Squad, now fully aware of the weight of her past, faced the consequences head-on. Sergeant Miller, squad leader of the unit, was summoned to Colonel Matthews' office immediately. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a cautious, almost defensive posture. His team had underestimated Mara Briggs, and now he had to answer for their recklessness. Each member of the squad had been disciplined in proportion to their involvement. Formal reprimands, additional duties, and mandatory counseling sessions focusing on respect, team dynamics, and situational awareness. The officers detailed the event to the rest of the company during a mandatory briefing. Mason Hale, Walters, Kane, and the others had to recount their actions aloud, facing not just their commanding officers, but the silent judgment of every soldier in attendance. The room's atmosphere was thick with tension, whispers, and shifting eyes. Arrogance had been replaced by humility, fear, and reluctant respect. Colonel Matthews addressed Miller directly. "You allowed your squad to act recklessly. As a leader, your responsibility is to enforce discipline and anticipate the consequences of insubordination. Today, that failure was costly, not physically, thanks to Miss Briggs, but reputationally and operationally." Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat, swallowing hard. The reprimand stung more than the thought of physical harm. He understood now the depth of experience he had challenged without realizing it. Outside the office, Alpha Squad carried out additional tasks assigned by command: facility maintenance, security drills, and supervised training under strict observation.
Every action they took was scrutinized, every decision second-guessed. Their peers watched closely, silently noting how arrogance could be dismantled by skill and discipline. Meanwhile, rumors of Mara's past spread through the base. The story of the 20-year SEAL veteran who neutralized an entire squad in seconds became a quiet lesson in respect. Miller's squad, once brimming with pride, now felt the weight of accountability and the sting of their misjudgment. Even after the immediate disciplinary actions, the consequences lingered. Every soldier in Miller's unit carried the memory of that day, the moment they had crossed boundaries, the rapidity with which they had been subdued, and the revelation of Mara Briggs's history. It became a benchmark for behavior, a cautionary tale of what happens when arrogance meets experience. Sergeant Hale watched the squad work under scrutiny, his gaze steady. "He's learned the hard way," he murmured, "but respect earned this way, it lasts longer than any lecture." The squad members exchanged silent glances, humility tempered with embarrassment. No one would repeat such reckless behavior, not with Mara Briggs in their midst, and not with the shadow of her SEAL legacy looming over every decision. By the end of the day, the consequences were clear. Accountability had been enforced, respect restored, and a precedent set. Northwood Base had been reminded, in no uncertain terms, that skill, discipline, and history carried weight far beyond rank or bravado. And for Miller's squad, the lesson was indelible. Their arrogance had been corrected, their understanding of boundaries forever altered. The storm had passed, but its mark would remain.
The sun dipped low over Northwood Base, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Mara Briggs walked through the quiet corridors, each step measured, her presence calm yet unmistakable. The locker room incident and the subsequent reckoning with Alpha Squad had shifted the energy of the base, but she moved as if untouched, carrying the weight of her experience without the need for acknowledgement or applause. Staff Sergeant Hale fell into step beside her, a faint smile on his face. "You know," he said quietly, "not everyone would have handled it the way you did. 20 years, and you didn't even have to raise your voice." Mara glanced at him, eyes steady. "It's not about proving strength. It's about maintaining it quietly. True discipline doesn't need validation. Respect is earned, yes, but it doesn't require a spotlight." Across the base, Alpha Squad trained under supervision, their movements cautious, deliberate. The arrogance that once defined them was replaced with attentiveness and humility. Mason Hale occasionally cast furtive glances toward Mara as she passed, silently measuring the woman who had reshaped their understanding of authority and consequence in mere minutes. Mara paused at the edge of the parade ground, looking out over the formation of soldiers moving in precise unison. She remembered the missions, the deployments, and the countless hours where success and failure were measured not by recognition, but by survival, by discipline, and by the lives protected. That mindset had guided her today, as always, and would continue to do so. Hale spoke again, voice low, almost reverent. "They'll remember this day, not because of punishment, but because of how you carried yourself. That speaks louder than anything else." Mara nodded slightly, allowing a rare, subtle sense of satisfaction to settle in, yet it was quiet, internal. She had no desire for accolades, no need for the whispers of admiration to define her. The lesson had been delivered, the boundaries enforced, and the truth revealed. That was enough. The base hummed with routine, the ordinary sounds of daily life continuing as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, a subtle shift had occurred. Respect for Mara Briggs, for her past, her experience, and her silent authority permeated the ranks. Soldiers moved with more awareness. Leaders enforced boundaries more decisively. And the quiet lesson of restraint and discipline echoed in every action. Mara turned away from the parade ground, walking toward her quarters. She carried herself with the same composure that had defined her throughout 20 years of naval special warfare.
The world would never need to know the details of her missions, the sacrifices she had made, or the battles she had survived. It was enough that she acted with honor and precision when it mattered most. In silence, she held her dignity. In quiet, she commanded respect. And in every measured step, Mara Briggs exemplified the essence of true heroism: steadfast, unassuming, and unwavering, even when no one was watching. The storm had passed. The lesson had been taught. And Northwood Base had forever been reminded: true strength often speaks in silence, and the measure of a warrior is not in recognition, but in integrity preserved quietly with unwavering discipline.